You ever have one of those nights where a single conversation changes everything? Where you walk into a room feeling small and walk out realizing you were the biggest force in it all along? Hi there, if you're watching this, maybe you felt it too. That quiet fire inside you. That moment you just know you've had enough of being underestimated. Well, tonight's story is for you. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I've seen people tuning in from New York, Austin, Chicago, Phoenix, and it honestly means the world to know this community is growing one real story at a time. And hey, if you find strength, truth, or even just a little bit of you in these stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you more moments like this, stories that speak to you, not at you. Because tonight's story, it starts with a family dinner. The kind that should have felt like love, but turned into something else entirely. Let me take you back. You think by 31, the ache for your parents' approval would dull, soften into something manageable. But no, it lingers, it shapeshifts. It hides behind your most polished smiles and carefully curated calm, then strikes at the smallest slights. Even after building something from nothing, after nights spent stitching together code and pitch decks, your mind still asks, will they finally see me now? When my mother called on a Tuesday afternoon to invite me to dinner, her voice was light, breezy. Just something casual. Family, food, nothing fancy. But there was a flicker behind her words, something tight and polite. I know that flicker. It's the same one she wears at weddings she didn't want to attend. Still, I said yes. I stared at the closet for far too long before choosing the navy dress. Soft fabric. Elegant, understated neckline. Serious but not trying too hard. My hair curled just enough to frame my face, as if I'd made no effort, though I had, of course. My heels were modest. My heart? Less so. It was leaping stupidly, like a teenager going home with straight A's. I brought Brian with me. He wasn't just a date. He was the kind of person you want on your side in a room full of people who don't believe in you. Kind eyes, steady presence. The kind of man who listens like your words matter. But to my parents, Brian was nothing more than a placeholder. A curiosity. Another name they'd forget in a week. Is he the one from that tech firm? My dad had asked when I mentioned him last month. No, Dad, I had replied. I'm the one with the tech firm. The house hadn't changed. Same stone facade, same wraparound porch with the faded welcome mat. Inside, the scent of rosemary chicken wafted through the air, as familiar as it was unremarkable. Matt, my younger brother, greeted us first, in that smug, charming way only youngest siblings master. He hugged me like he was proud to be doing me a favor. Dinner was set in the dining room, candles flickering in the crystal holders they'd received for their wedding. The good silverware, the kind Mom only brought out when she wanted to make a point, was arranged perfectly beside bone-white china. It wasn't a casual dinner. It was a performance. I was already on stage, and I hadn't yet said a word. We sat, the five of us, a picture of familial harmony. Wine poured. Salad passed. Light conversation floated around like steam, fragile and fleeting. For a moment, I let myself believe maybe this time would be different. Maybe they had finally accepted that the life I built, though unconventional, was real. But then, like clockwork, the conversation shifted. It always did. So, my mom said, her voice cutting clean through the candlelight as she delicately sliced into her salmon, "Are you still doing that app thing?" That pause, the way she let the word app dangle like an apology, told me everything. She hadn't asked because she was curious. She asked because she was amused. Yes, I said, offering a smile I had practiced for years, serene, unshaken. Actually, we just closed our funding round. Funding? Her eyebrows lifted, and she laughed like I'd told her I won a prize for Best Imaginary Friend. That sounds like Monopoly money. She chuckled again, sharper this time. You know, Jenna, at some point, you might want to look into a real job. You're not getting younger. That last part, the real job line, wasn't new. But it hit different. Not because the words were crueler, but because they were so predictable, so utterly careless. She didn't even flinch saying them. To her, it was just truth. The laugh that followed was a chorus. Dad joined in, shaking his head. Matt smirked and let out a low whistle. Even the air in the room seemed to press against me like an accusation. Ryan stayed quiet, his eyes finding mine. I knew he wanted to speak. I could feel it in the way he shifted slightly toward me, like a lighthouse leaning into a storm. But he didn't. Not yet. I gripped my fork hard, so hard I felt the ridges press into my fingers. I imagined snapping it in two just to feel something break other than my composure. This wasn't a dinner. It was an ambush disguised as family time. A performance where I played the role of the overgrown dreamer, and they, the rational adults, shaking their heads at her illusions. What they didn't know, what they refused to know, was that behind that so-called app thing were thousands of users, hundreds of late nights, and one very real future. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Not the sleepless work, not the traction, not the dozens of meetings it took to get even one VC to look me in the eye instead of at my co-founder. To them, I was still a girl playing house with technology. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Not yet. I waited, not because I lacked the words, but because I knew that soon they wouldn't be needed. I wish I could say it was the first time they'd mocked me, that this dinner was an aberration, that the laughter felt foreign and jarring, but that would be a lie. I knew that sound. Brittle, dismissive, gilded in superiority. I'd grown up with it. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes the mockery wore a smile. Sometimes it hid behind a polite tilt of the head or a question laced with saccharine disbelief. So that's what you're doing with your degree? Or worse, is this still a phase, or? Since I left my comfortable corporate marketing job 3 years ago, the one with the respectable title, the 401k, and the kind of business card my parents could brag about to their friends, I had become something else in their eyes. Not a risk taker, not an entrepreneur, but a driftwood girl floating on dreams they didn't understand. They called it being lost. A word that stung because I had never felt more found. What they couldn't see, or refused to, was the why. I didn't leap into this blindly. I left because I had seen too much rot in the system. I had watched veterans, people who had served, sacrificed, returned home broken, wait months for a therapy appointment. I had seen the cracks, and I couldn't unsee them. So I built Calmer, a simple, streamlined platform that did one thing exceptionally well: connected people in pain with professionals who could help. No red tape, no waiting lists, just help when it was needed. We were small, scrappy, but real. We'd onboarded our first 1,000 users within the first 4 months, and when I shared that win with my parents during a holiday dinner, my mother blinked and asked if those users paid anything or were just clicking around. They didn't mean to be cruel. At least, I don't think they did. Their world was narrow, secure, linear. My father had worked at the same law firm for 37 years. My mother had managed the PTA like a Fortune 500 CEO. They believed in ladders, not leaps. Still, understanding that didn't make their contempt easier to carry. At this dinner, this meticulously curated family tableau of wine glasses and barely concealed judgment, it escalated. The moment came halfway through the meal when the table had grown warm with conversation and alcohol. My father, cheeks flushed with Pinot Noir, leaned back and asked casually, "So Jenna, what did you pull in last year? All those coffee shop hours must add up." I paused. Not because I was ashamed, I wasn't, but because I knew the number wouldn't land the way I wanted it to. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't lawyer money, but it was honest and it was mine. "About 52, I said. He raised one brow. A slow, deliberate arch that said more than words ever could. He tilted his glass, swirled the wine like he was savoring the irony. "That's cute," he said, a pause, then the punchline, "Maybe you should marry rich." And then, as if they'd rehearsed it, the room exploded in laughter. My mother laughed in that tight, staccato rhythm she used when something was just scandalous enough to entertain. Matt, my brother, chuckled like he couldn't quite believe I'd walked into that one. Even the chandelier overhead seemed to shimmer with mockery. It was the kind of laughter that didn't leave room for you to speak, the kind that folds over itself, swelling into a wave meant to drown. And I sat there, spine straight, jaw locked, letting it wash over me. I didn't laugh. I didn't flinch, but I felt the crack run down my center. They weren't laughing at the job, they were laughing at me. At the idea that their daughter, who once brought home honor roll certificates, who once color-coded her college applications, who once played cello in the school orchestra, was now some abstract digital nomad, peddling apps in between lats. They didn't care that I'd built something from the ground up, that I led a small team of engineers and therapists, that I'd raised an early round of funding without any family connections, without a safety net, without even a damn cheerleader in my own house. To them, I was still the girl who needed to settle down. find structure, get a real job. Ryan hadn't said a word all night. He'd watched, measured, taken in every loaded glance, every backhanded comment. But now, as the laughter simmered and the moment begged for silence, he reached for his wine, took a calm sip, and cleared his throat. It was soft, subtle, but I knew that sound. He was about to stand. It happened in one breath. One sentence, simple, steady, precise. And yet, it landed with the force of a thunderclap. Brian placed his glass on the linen-covered table like it was a gavel and spoke without theatrics, without venom, just facts. Actually, he said, his voice clear but never raised, Jenna doesn't need to marry rich. She just closed a $4.8 million seed round with my firm. That's real capital, not monopoly money. Time stopped. The kind of silence that followed wasn't casual. It wasn't the lull that comes after too much wine or the awkward pause of a misfired joke. This silence was surgical. Cold, clean, the kind that slices open a room and spills the truth across the floor. Across from me, my mother froze mid-chew, her fork suspended inches from her plate like a relic on display. Her face, once flushed with laughter, turned a chalky white, as if someone had drained the color from her cheeks with a single pull. Her mouth twitched slightly, but no sound came out. My father blinked. Once, twice, a slow mechanical flutter that suggested the wiring in his brain was being rerouted against its will. His lips parted as if to say something, but nothing arrived. His hands, once confident in gesturing across conversation, now rested perfectly still on the arms of his chair, suddenly aware of themselves. Matt, my brother, leaned back slightly in his seat. His eyes darted from Brian to me, then back again. "Wait," he muttered, blinking hard. "Seriously?" But Brian wasn't done. "She's the founder of Calmer," he said, calmly, firmly, like a teacher correcting a textbook. The same startup Techness named one of the top 10 mental health innovations of the year. My partners and I fought to be part of her round. She's got more grit than half the founders in my portfolio, and I've backed unicorns. He said it like it was nothing, but to me it was everything. Because in that moment, at that table, in that house, surrounded by people who had never once asked a single genuine question about what I was building, he spoke the truth I had never dared to say aloud. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority came not from bravado, but from belief. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one in the room who believed in me. Their reactions were instant but layered. I watched it unfold like a slow-motion unraveling. My mother, the woman who once said, "Apps are what kids make in dorm rooms," now sat stunned, her gaze locked not on me, but on her salad, as if the arugula might offer answers. Her hand, still holding the fork, trembled just slightly. It was subtle, but I saw it. The fragility of her certainty shattered. My father shifted in his seat. I knew that posture. It was the same one he used in court when an opposing argument caught him off guard. Leaning back, blinking slowly, buying time. Searching for a counterattack that wouldn't come. Because this wasn't opinion, it was math. Contracts, press coverage, public recognition. My brother, always the sideline commentator, had gone uncharacteristically quiet. He wasn't smirking now. There was a trace of something else there. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was regret. Either way, it was new. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. For years, I had dreamed of a moment like this, of finally proving them wrong. But now that it was here, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious or vengeful. I felt still, not hollow, just settled, like a stone finally resting at the bottom of a lake after years of drifting. Ryan reached for his glass again and took a small sip, completely unaffected by the tension he had just dismantled. He didn't look smug. He looked calm, grounded, like someone who knew the value of truth and the weight it carried. That silence, that thick, impossible silence, stretched, and in it I felt something shift. Not just in them, in me. Because I had spent so long trying to earn their approval, trying to fit my path into a mold they could understand. But the truth was, they'd never applauded unless they had built the stage. And this stage was mine. For the first time, I realized I no longer needed their validation. I'd already had something better. I had earned it. I had fought for it. And someone whose opinion wasn't filtered through the lens of family history or generational expectation, had seen it, honored it, and said it aloud. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The kind that doesn't ask for applause, just acknowledgement. And in their stunned silence, I finally heard it. The air in the car was thick with everything that hadn't been said, the kind of silence that hums beneath the skin, vibrating with aftershocks of emotional tectonics. I stared out the passenger window as the suburbs blurred past, streetlights casting long shadows over empty sidewalks, lawn sprinklers ticking rhythmically against the dark. I wasn't thinking in complete thoughts, just fragments, the sound of my father's voice, the stunned look on my mother's face, the way Brian had spoken like there was never any question of my worth. Brian didn't speak right away, and I loved him for that. Some people try to fill silence with reassurance, or worse, with cheerfulness, like you can patch over a wound by pretending it's not bleeding. But Brian knew better. He just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting between us on the center console, fingers curled open in quiet invitation. I didn't take his hand immediately. I wasn't ready to be comforted. I wasn't even sure what I was feeling. Not exactly pain, not exactly pride. Something heavier, older. Something like recognition. A few miles out from my apartment, as we passed a dark stretch lined with pine trees, he reached over and gently took my hand in his. "I didn't do that for them," he said, eyes still on the road. "I did that for you. You deserve to be seen." The words landed softly, but they cracked something open in me. My throat tightened. I turned away so he wouldn't see, but I felt the tears gather anyway, hot and quiet, sliding down my cheeks in a way that surprised even me. Because it wasn't about being hurt. Not this time. Not really. It was the relief. The strange, unexpected relief of having someone step in, not to rescue, not to lecture, but to witness. For so long, I'd been the only one holding my line, weathering the disbelief and the jokes and the invisible shrug my parents gave every time I tried to explain my work. I had learned to swallow their doubts, to package them as fuel, to keep building anyway. Brian had drawn a line with just a few sentences, and not a single one of them had been about defending me. They had been about acknowledging me. I wiped my face and squeezed his hand back just briefly, then let my palm rest quietly in his. The rest of the ride was quiet, not awkward, not heavy, just full, a silence that felt earned. When he pulled into the lot in front of my building, he walked me up without asking. We didn't say much in the elevator, didn't need to. The truth between us didn't require repetition. It had already been spoken, loud enough for my past to hear. Once inside, I kicked off my shoes and sank into the couch. Ryan sat beside me, close but not pressing. We stayed like that for a long while. No TV, no music, just the soft ticking of the clock and the quiet hum of the fridge. Eventually, he kissed my temple, told me to sleep, and let himself out. I didn't move, not right away. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about every dinner, every family gathering, every moment over the years where I'd tried to prove that my choices were legitimate, that my life wasn't some aimless rebellion. I thought about the time I showed my mother the first mock-ups of the Calmer interface, and she said, "It's nice, but do you think people really trust apps for that sort of thing?" I thought about the expression on her face tonight, pale and speechless, when Brian said my name in the same breath as a $4.8 million investment. That look, stunned, stripped of superiority, was still flickering behind my eyes when my phone buzzed. It was a text from her, just a few words. "I didn't realize it was that serious. I'm proud of you, Jenna. I'm sorry." I read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't even capitalized properly. But it was more than I had ever expected. For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. My instinct was to brush it off, to say it was too little, too late. That her pride meant nothing after years of passive dismissal. But that wasn't quite true. The message sat there on my screen, softening the sharpest edges of the evening. It wasn't everything. It didn't undo the years. But it cracked open a door I thought had long since sealed shut. And for the first time, I let myself wonder what it might feel like to walk through it. Not for her. For me, validation is a curious hunger. It starts as a need for recognition, for someone you love to say, "I see you, I understand." But if you feed that need for too long without nourishment, it mutates into something more desperate, more corrosive. It becomes a silent negotiation. If I achieve enough, will you finally believe I'm not lost? I didn't realize how many years I'd spent bartering my ambition for the hope of being seen, until the night I stopped. That dinner, where I was laughed at by the people who raised me, should have left me hollow. And for a brief moment it did. But not because of their mockery. I'd grown used to that. Rather, because I finally saw it for what it was, their laughter wasn't about me. It was about them. About the limitations of their worldview. About the discomfort people feel when they're faced with a path they've never walked, and therefore cannot measure. My parents never hated me. They didn't even dislike what I was doing. They simply couldn't grasp it. They had grown up in a world that revered job titles, retirement plans, and brick-and-mortar success. The idea that I could build something intangible, an idea, a platform, an app, and that it could have value in lives I'd never meet, that was vapor to them, unprovable, unreal. But here's the thing I've come to understand. Just because someone doesn't understand your vision doesn't mean it's not real. It just means they don't have the eyes for it yet. I used to internalize their confusion. I used to shrink myself in their presence, simplifying what I did so they wouldn't feel left behind. I'd say project instead of company, or just some tech stuff, instead of mental health infrastructure. I handed them a diluted version of my truth, hoping maybe it would go down easier. But it never did, and it never would. Because I was never going to be digestible to them in the way they wanted. And that's okay. I didn't build Calmer to be digestible. I built it because I saw people slipping through the cracks, veterans who came home with invisible wounds, parents too burned out to reach out, students spiraling through the dark with no one answering the call. I saw the pain, I saw the silence, and I knew I had the tools to create a bridge between the two. It was never about proving anything to my family. It was about solving something for someone else. But that night, when Brian spoke up, when their faces froze mid-laugh, I felt something shift. Not in them. In me. For the first time, I felt the shape of my own voice in a room that had always tried to shrink it. Not because I raised it, not because I defended myself, but because my work did. My effort, my vision, my unshakable belief in the thing I had built, that spoke louder than I ever could. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you realize you don't need applause to know your worth. You don't need the nod, the hand on the shoulder, the "we're proud of you" delivered too late. You just need your truth and the resilience to keep standing in it. Success, as I've learned, is never loud in the way we imagine. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or spotlights. Sometimes it walks quietly into a dining room and shifts the temperature without saying a word. Sometimes it's a line in a conversation that changes the way someone sees you. Not because they finally opened their eyes, but because your light grew too bright to ignore. That night, my parents didn't transform. They didn't suddenly become my biggest supporters. But they hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw recognition flicker behind their discomfort. It wasn't applause, but it was acknowledgement. And for me, that was enough. Enough to let go of the ache. Enough to stop chasing their approval like a moving finish line. Enough to know I could move forward without dragging their doubts behind me. I still love them. I always will. But I don't need them to understand every detail of what I do. That's not the measure of my success. The measure is in every user who opens Calmer and finds a therapist when they need it most. It's in every person who sends us a message saying they didn't know help could be this easy, this fast, this human. That's the applause that matters. So if you're sitting in silence tonight, if the people who should believe in you are the ones who doubt you most, let me say this. You are not small. You are not foolish. You are not invisible. Keep building. Keep going. And when the moment comes, when your truth is loud enough to shake the table, don't say a word. Let the silence say it for you.